What if I told you that this crisis, the heat waves, the floods, the smoke-choked skies, was never really about the weather? What if I told you that beneath every shattered glacier and every burning forest lies a human story, centuries old and soaked in denial? The truth is, we are not just living through a climate crisis. We are living through the consequences of a long, unbroken chain of choices. Choices that began long before you and I were born. This isn't just a crisis of carbon. It's a crisis of memory. A crisis of forgetting how we came to stand on this edge and who we became on the way here. Long before we ever measured temperature in degrees or calculated carbon in the atmosphere, we lived in rhythm with the earth. The rivers shaped our journeys. The stars guided our hands. We built our stories from wind, from stone, from soil. But somewhere along the way, we stopped listening. And that silence, that arrogance, became our undoing. The seeds of the crisis were planted when humanity first tasted the power to alter its environment. Thousands of years ago, we began cutting forests not just for firewood but for conquest. We drained wetlands not for survival but for expansion. Ancient civilizations like the Sumerians built great cities on borrowed time, irrigating the land until salt poisoned their soil. They rose with the rivers, and fell with them too. In China, during the Zhou dynasty, deforestation triggered landslides and floods that swallowed entire villages. In the Mayan heartlands, drought, made worse by the stripping of trees, fractured a once mighty civilization. In every corner of the ancient world, climate was not a distant threat. It was a force that humbled kings and buried empires. Yet we always thought we'd be different. When the steam engine roared to life in the 18th century, it wasn't just coal that we unlocked. It was momentum, a hunger for speed, for profit, for control. Factories rose like temples of a new faith, fed by black lungs and burning mountains. The skies over London and Manchester turned dark, not just with smoke, but with the weight of what we had unleashed. Still, the world applauded. Progress, they called it. By the time oil spilled into the veins of civilization in the 20th century, we were drunk on our own inventions. Highways carved through forests, planes crossed continents, plastic wrapped the bones of the earth. Convenience became sacred, consumption became a right. And beneath it all, the atmosphere, that delicate skin of life, began to rupture. The warning signs came quietly at first, a shrinking glacier, a rising tide, a withered crop, but the silence didn't last. By the 1970s, scientists were sounding the alarm. James Hansen stood before Congress in 1988 and told the world what it didn't want to hear, that we were changing the planet's climate. Permanently. The data was there. The evidence undeniable. But oil spoke louder. Companies with names we still know today, Exxon, Chevron, BP, buried the truth. They had the science. They had the forecasts. They chose profits. They chose silence. And as the world argued, the seas warmed. Coral reefs bleached. Forests ignited. And entire nations, like Tuvalu and the Maldives, began to vanish under the waves. Yet the crisis is not just scientific. It's historical. It's political. It's deeply human. Look closer at the maps of disaster and you'll see the scars of empire. Nations that once fueled their wealth through colonization now emit the most, while those once colonized suffer the earliest and worst consequences. Africa emits less than 4% of global emissions, yet bears some of the fiercest droughts. Bangladesh did not cause the sea to rise, but it will drown first. We like to think of the climate crisis as a modern dilemma, but it is deeply rooted in history. It was shaped by centuries of extraction, of taking without giving, of silencing the voices that warned us. Indigenous peoples, who managed forests for thousands of years with balance and reverence, were displaced, erased, and ignored. The very people who lived in harmony with the earth, pushed aside by those who sought to dominate it. And what of the 21st century? We were supposed to know better. We sent satellites to measure melting ice. We published reports, held climate summits, signed protocols. But emissions kept rising, year after year, decade after decade. The system we built, fossil fuels, fast fashion, industrial agriculture, endless growth, was never designed to stop, only to grow. And so, even as the storms came, stronger, faster, deadlier, we kept going. In 2023, wildfires turned the skies of Canada blood red. In India, temperatures climbed past 50 degrees Celsius, making entire cities unlivable. In the Horn of Africa, drought pushed millions toward starvation. Climate refugees, once a theoretical term, now walk across borders with empty hands and haunted eyes. And yet, in air-conditioned boardrooms and political halls, the dance of delay continues. Promises are made, deadlines are moved, targets softened, and the planet watches, not with anger, but with indifference. Because the Earth doesn't need us, we need it. But if history shows us anything, it's this. Nothing is inevitable, not collapse, not survival. We've stood on the edge before, in times of war, of plague, of revolution, and chosen to change. Not all at once, not without pain, but we changed. The abolition of slavery, the fall of apartheid, the end of colonial rule. These were not gifts handed down from the powerful. They were fought for, demanded, insisted upon by those who refused to accept the lie that nothing could be different. And now, we are called again. This time not just to protect our lives, but the web of life itself. The oceans, the forests, the creatures who cannot vote or speak but feel our actions all the same. We are called to remember that we are not separate from the earth. We are of it. And when we poison it, we poison ourselves. The technologies exist, the knowledge exists, the solutions, from renewable energy to regenerative farming to indigenous land stewardship, are already here. What's missing is not innovation. It's imagination. It's courage. It's the moral clarity to say, enough. This is not a fight we win by recycling or driving electric cars, though those things help. This is a transformation of how we live, how we govern, how we see our place in the world, a cultural reckoning, a spiritual awakening. And in that, there is hope. Because the greatest revolutions in history didn't begin in palaces. They began in hearts, in whispers, in the refusal of ordinary people to accept injustice as fate. The climate crisis may be the most terrifying challenge we've ever faced, but it is also our greatest chance to redefine what it means to be human. The world we have was built on forgetting. The world we need must be built on remembering. Remember the forests that once covered continents. Remember the rivers that ran clear. Remember the wisdom of those who walked gently. And then act, not out of fear, but out of love. For the generations to come, for the ones already suffering, and for the earth who has waited long enough. Because the clock is not just ticking, it's burning, and the story is still being written. The only question is, what chapter will we leave behind?